Hello, I'm Des Dillov, co-founder of Thinkers50. Excuse me. Welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live session, celebrating the brightest new voices in the world of management thinking. In January, we announced the Thinkers50 Radar list for 2024, 30 exciting rising stars in management thinking, and we'll be hearing from two of them today. This year's Radar list is brought to you in partnership with Deloitte. A key topic is making workplaces wholly inclusive and healthy for everyone. Another is sustainability. And as you might expect, AI and all things digital loom large, including platforms, which we'll be talking about today. We like to make these sessions as interactive as possible, so please do let us know where you are joining us from and put your questions in the chat or comments box. Our guests today are Daniel Trabucci and Tommaso Buganza. Daniel is Senior Assistant Professor and Tommaso Full Professor of Leadership and Innovation at the School of Management, Politecnico di Milano. Daniel also serves as a Senior Researcher in the Lead-In Lab, the Laboratory for Leadership, Design and Innovation, which was co-founded by Tommaso. Daniel and Tommaso are the authors of the 2023 book, Platform Thinking. Read the past, write the future. Are the creators of the Platform Thinking Matrix, which summarizes the strategies for fostering innovation through platforms, and they're also the creators of the Platform Thinking Business Model Canvas. Daniel and Tommaso are also joint founders of Symplatform, a yearly international conference on digital platforms that aims to match scholars and practitioners. They're co-founders and scientific directors of the Platform Thinking HUB, a community of innovation leaders focusing on platforms. Daniel, Tommaso, welcome. You're very busy.
And we use the word platform thinking quite often. Hi, Des. Hi, everyone.
Well, hi. Welcome and congratulations on the Thinkers50 Radar recognition. It's great to have both of you on. As you say, you use the word platform thinking a lot. I think it's one of those words, isn't it, that's very much in the ether. People are talking about platforms a lot, but I think it's also one of those words that kind of has it means different things to different people. So perhaps we could just start with a pithy definition. What do you mean when you talk about platforms and platform thinking?
Well, you actually started off with the question that we like the most. We probably spend a lot of time in our daily lives trying to define platforms and to explain to people what we mean about platforms. The words are actually used by human beings to align themselves quite quickly. And so we can easily say that the word platform is broken. It's not working anymore. You enter in different rooms, you enter in different companies, you enter in different fields, and the word platform do have different meanings. Mind the gap between the train and the platform business model, the technological platform. And the more the digital revolution goes on, the more we tend to call platform anything that is digital. And this is kind of a pity, because if we call so many different things platforms, we end up not actually getting the essence of what is making them different from something else. So usually we start from defining what that something else is. And that something else to us is the linear value chain. So thinking back to Michael Porter's work with the value chain, we are used to think that there is one dominant business model, and still there is, that put in place suppliers, giving you some kind of work in progress, raw materials, you add your value there, and you sell it to your customers, whatever is B2C, B2B. Well, when we talk about platform thinking, or more specifically about the different typologies of platforms, we do refer to the business models that are not based on this linear transaction. In a first approximation, I would say, we can say that anytime the value creation process is not that linear, we are in a platform. Usually, we look for two main characteristics: multiple customers and indirect cross-site network externalities. Very briefly, Airbnb, it has clearly two customers, the travelers and the host. And the more travelers you have there, the more the platform is going to be interesting for the host, and vice versa. So we do take care of all those initiatives, those services, those companies that do have these characteristics. So multiple customers that are generating value together along with a platform provider. And platform thinking to us is the way to think in this new model that is all around us.
So tell me, I mean, you used the example of Airbnb. I mean, give me a couple of other examples of platforms. I'm sure that, you know, the concept is familiar probably to most people listening, but let's just flesh it out a little bit, could you?
Yes, of course. We can consider, at least we should consider that there are two main architectures that we can refer to when we think about platforms. The first is what is normally called the transactional platform. And so Airbnb is an example, but you got in the same family, Uber, you got Amazon, you got eBay, you got Spotify. So all of these platforms, what they basically do, they allow some kind of transaction between two different customers. So you got, you know, travelers on the one side and a host on the other side. You got somebody wanting a ride on one side, and you got drivers on the other side. So it's always the same story. What they do, they actually reduce the friction that you got in the market. These people are looking for each other, and they enable or, you know, make it simple to have a transaction. And the way they've got to capture the value is to take a small part of this transaction. But if we consider what Daniel said before, we call platform every kind of business model that is based on at least two different customers, and they need to coexist. So they are somehow connected by this indirect network externalities, which brings us to another family of platforms, like, for example, the social networks or Google. Google, you know, I'm thinking about the search engine in this case. So if you think about Google as a search engine, you do not have this kind of a transaction. So you still have two customers. You got, you know, us, you know, searching with Google, and you've got the advertiser. So somebody who is paying to basically have advertising spaces on Google, or to be put on the top of the list in their search and so on. Again, we got two customers here. Can they coexist? Can they exist without coexisting? Basically, the answer is no, because I mean, if you look at me using Google, I really don't care about the advertisers, but actually they are paying for what I'm having, so I want to have it for free. And if you take the advertisers out of the equation, the system is not working. On the other side, the advertisers are very interested in how many users you've got on my side. So again, you got two customers, and you got you know, sort of interaction between them. They create value together, even though there's not a transaction. So we call this second type of platforms orthogonal platforms, just to make a difference between those enabling transactions and those which are not. And then, as you can imagine, there are many other, you know, sub divisions and you know, different strategies and way to make it happen. But this is just to give you a very fast answer to your question. So these are the companies we're talking about.
Okay, so orthogonal, which isn't a word that I don't use every day, but it's kind of at right angles. It's where things intersect in a sort of perpendicular way rather than straightforward. Okay, all right, I'm with it. Now, you've been researching this area, I mean, platforms for more than a decade now. So how has the kind of the conversation, the story about platforms, how has that changed? How would you characterize, you know, where we were probably, you know, say 10 years ago, when the word platform probably wasn't quite so familiar, and you know, people wouldn't have been using it all the time, to where we are now? How has the story evolved?
Well, I could say we can use this question to actually tell you something more about how we started working together.
Right.
10 years ago, I entered in this building. 12 years ago, Tommaso was in New York City, and well, he was starting to get in touch with a lot of digital services that I can say he fell in love with. And that was my master thesis. So I started working on these digital services back then. They were not called platforms. You're right, this. Platforms back then was mainly related to technological infrastructure, to another type that are innovation platforms like Windows or iOS. And in those years, Airbnb and Uber were kind of popping up. The kind of things that was intriguing Tommaso and then myself as a student was the fact that those companies were offering services for free. And this is strange. How can a business model be being built around something that has not a clear revenue stream? And there was not a connection between those digital services and the platform world. And actually, we read a paper by Marshall Van Alstyne and Geoff Parker that I guess you know very, very well. And
Yeah, Marshall, very well.
yeah. And in 2005, they wrote this paper on two-sided markets that were actually trying to answer to this question: how is it possible to give away a product for free? And they were studying basically what we call transactional platforms at large. And we saw in that moment that actually these services that were for free to an end user were actually capturing value through the presence of another customer, the orthogonal player that Tommaso was talking about, not through advertisement, but by selling to these guys data. And again, the mechanism is the same. The more people generate data, the more those data are interesting. We spent 5 years basically studying platforms at large, orthogonal platforms, transactional platforms, mainly startups coming from the digital world, so digital native, usually based in Silicon Valley or anyhow in the States. When you mention our titles, Tommaso is professor of leadership and innovation. I'm actually professor of platform thinking, but I've been teaching leadership and innovation as well. And we come from innovation management. We come from established firms trying to change what they are doing, remaining relevant in a world that is changing. And 5 years ago, more or less, we tried to cross the two worlds. We wondered, what if we could take what we learn looking at platforms and helping established firms, not in becoming a platform, but in fostering innovation through those logics. So possibly remaining a linear value chain, but adding services, new initiatives, new layers, whatsoever digital business transformation initiatives is powered by platform mechanisms. And that's what we mean with platform thinking. So platform thinking does not necessarily mean to create a platform-based startup. It actually means to learn from those companies and getting the chance to use these new models that are literally all around us, but still not so discussed and not so used in executive offices in established firms. And that was the idea of platform thinking, learning from these new companies, used to be new at this point, and trying to bring those messages into the daily business.
Well, if I may just add a thing, because in answering to your question, what changed in the last years? The magic that this kind of business model is enabling is that you can grow up very fast. You can scale up very fast without having the cost growing up at the same pace. So at the same speed. This is the interesting thing. So in a certain way, it's not surprising that many startups try to create a platform. And that is logic, because if you are a startup and you want to start competing against, let's say, Hilton, so the kind of investment you should do in terms of buildings, in terms of architects, in terms of services, it's huge. So there's no way you can really do that. There's a big barrier that you cannot go through. And so that's the reason why many startups use platforms. But at the end, the mechanism can be used by companies as well, which are not platforms. And what we are seeing now, and seems to be one of the most interesting things we observed outside in the world in the last year and a half, is that many established companies, very well-known established companies, they are creating platforms, which does not mean that they are no more, as Daniel said, it doesn't mean that they are no more value chain based, but they are adding platforms on top of them. Examples are, there are huge examples. One very interesting is the John Deere, for example. So they still do tractors, but they have got this platform for data exchanges. One Airbus is doing the same. So we were curious about this, and more or less 1 year ago, we went to look at all the companies in the Standard & Poor's 500, and we took out from the list those which are basically native platforms. So we took out Amazon, we took out Google and these players. But still, we had at the end more than 480 companies, which were very industrial companies. So you got Walmart inside, you got General Motors inside, you got Pfizer inside. So these kind of players. And we started to look for, some signals of platformization in what they do. And the result that we obtained was incredible. So up to 92% of the Standard & Poor's 500 companies are, working somehow, some innovation that is connected to a platform. And this number is incredibly huge. Then, being sincere, we analyzed many of them, and we discovered that in some cases they still call platform something that is just a digital service. So you don't really have two customers. It's not very simple to scale it up and so on. But still, you got a large majority of companies, established companies, developing some kind of platform approach in what they do. And this is, somehow telling us that this thing is big. We love startups, we love digital services, but we are talking about something that probably has got a magnitude that is way higher, bigger than just, what we observed in the first 10 years.
Okay, well, we're joined, I see, by people from, Stoke in the UK and Sussex in the UK. We've got people from Boston, Mexico, Zurich, Paris, the Philadelphia suburbs. I can see Montreal, I can see Puerto Rico, I can see Bergen, Norway. So we've got a very global audience. I'm going to ask some of the questions that are starting to come in. So please do put your questions, because the guys, I'm sure, would be really interested to hear and answer your questions. But before we do, I'm going to take you backwards a little bit. Obviously, mostly you were talking about sort of digital services which are being called platforms. And mostly we are talking here about digital platforms. But have there always been platforms? I mean, is this a brand new thing, or is it, you think of kind of traditional marketplaces? Are they platforms, or are they not platforms?
We like to say that the three typologies that we mentioned, and I will leave to Tommaso the last one because he is the only one that can properly present that case, as good stories behind. We talk about transactional platforms, talking about Amazon, talking about Booking.com, talking about Airbnb. Reality is that the idea of the transactional platform was born in Persia 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. And that's, the market, the market that many of our towns still has. And the business model is the same. So the merchant is actually paying to have a space there. And the same with the orthogonal platform that we call client as a target, the advertisement based. It was the end of the 19th century in France, La Presse, for the first time, start selling advertising spaces. So yeah, platforms are not new. Digital technologies gave a boost to it. But I think the coolest one is what Tommaso can share with you.
Talking about digital technologies, typically what we say is that they are not triggering anything. They are acting as a catalyst. So in a chemical reaction, a catalyst is accelerating the reaction. The reaction was there anyway, but you got it accelerated a lot. So if you got a physical market in the streets, how many people can you have? You can have, thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands, but no more. If you do it on the internet, you are Amazon, you got billions. So the mechanism is already there, but given that it is based on networks analysis, on quantity, the value created at the end is huge. And there is this case that it took us a little bit to understand, but the case in which you create a service not to target your users with advertising, but actually to extract data, we said before, and use the data. So this thing started, at least 2,000 years ago in Rome. So in Rome was a huge city at a certain point. There were more than 1.5 million people living in Rome, and they didn't have a proper system for bathrooms and so on. So the problem was that people basically were doing what they had to do in the middle of a street, and there was a problem. So you can imagine the numbers, and also when it's hot in Rome, it can be very annoying. So there was an emperor who was called Vespasiano, and he created the first public bath. So people could go there, and instead of going in the street and pee in the street, they could do it in the public bathroom. How do you pay this thing? So there's a cost for it. Romans were very, very fixed with cost. So you need to cover the cost. And there was no way to ask people to pay to go to the bathroom because it was, they were accustomed to do it in the street. Basically, what they discovered was that in the urine, there is a material that was very useful for the production of leather. And leather was incredibly important in the Rome economy. So that was the idea. So I give something to you for free because in using it, you are giving something back to me, but you don't really care about. But if I take all of these things, data in one case or urine in the other, and I bring it to somebody else is more than willing to pay me for that. So the mechanism is there since ever. So the ability is to understand how to evolve it, how to make it grow, and so on. Let me add you one other thing. There are many businesses out there that are what we call natural platforms, and they just don't know it. So think about an airport. The airport is basically a platform. You are serving, the travelers, and given that they are there, somebody like Gucci, let's say, is more than willing to pay to have a space because they will increase their revenues according to the number of people that you are serving in your airport. This is basically exactly a platform. They don't, in many cases, not always. We actually met some very smart airports, but in many cases, they do not realize that they are more similar to Amazon for what they think. And they can learn from Amazon how to evolve and how to innovate. So this is part of what we do.
Okay, really interesting. I see that we are, just to let you guys know, I see we are joined by Nicola, who is an Amazon manager from Italy. So just bear in mind that you have expert eyes upon you, people who will have a very clear and could probably be doing some consulting work in the airports as well. So I'm going to take some of these questions because we've got some good questions. And again, we're being joined by I see someone's joined from Aninda from India is here. We've got someone from Rome. We've got someone from Brussels. They keep on coming, which is fantastic. Let me find the question I was looking for. Frank Kalberg is here. As digital platforms increasingly integrate AI to individualize content and improve efficiency, what will happen to the way human beings think and to our quality of life? As ever, a good question from Frank.
Wow.
Big question.
Well, this is definitely a big question. There are some technologies, and the metaverse and AI are definitely there, in our opinion, that are not necessarily platforms, but that are extremely coherent with the platform world. And, Frank's question would probably require a large reflection. I would answer probably with 2 points. On the one hand, platforms have been using a lot algorithms and or AI-oriented technologies already in the last 10 years. The matchmaking that many transactional platforms do are actually triggered by AI engines. I can definitely say that trying to study innovation within organizations, so leaving aside the pure platform model, I think what we are living now with generative AI revolution is putting ourselves in the position to critically reflect on what we are doing. We have an enormous opportunity, but we should find a way to properly assess those opportunities and leverage it. And we often say this story talking about platform thinking. With all the due respect, when we are teaching in class these topics, it happens quite often that there are people quite surprised by the mechanisms that we are telling about. And these stories are not that new. Booking.com, eBay were created 30 years ago. Many of the orthogonal platforms we are talking about are now 10, 12, 15 years old. So it's not something, that happened the day before yesterday. They are here with us since decades at this point. And we still believe, we see that there is a very little awareness on this topic. And when we get to AI, we're kind of afraid that in a world where a lot of people are still not able to recognize the previous generation of models properly, this may be difficult, scary for the technologies to come. So we do believe that human beings still have a relevant role in there, in actually putting in place probably one of our most important skills, which is critical thinking, which is on the content that a software is generating, but also it's becoming more and more important to have a clear understanding of the business model. We can also not call it business model in our everyday life, it's fine, but to have an idea of the behind the scenes, of the implications of what we are doing, on where we are putting our data. The important thing is being aware, and I think that talking about these topics is very important.
I was also thinking about Frank's question, that you're touching one of the starting point of our research 10 years back. The AI allows these digital services to be personalized, not customized, personalized. So you customize a service when you put it together some components that have been already predefined, and you try to find the right combination that is the nearest to your need. Personalization instead means that it's done for you. So it's done exactly for you. So AI this is mixing a couple of things. So on the one side, we are living in a world with a lot of sensors. So the phones we use, the watch we use, the ring we use. So all of these things are catching data, and there is now the ability of catching the data, transferring the data, using the data, analyzing the data with AI, in order to create a solution that is perfect to you. So it's their solution. It's different from mine, and which is great. So in terms of service development, it is great. Of course, we always say that every positive thing always have got a dark side. So what is the dark side? The dark side is that if you only give me what I expect and want to have, you never put myself outside my comfort zone. You never put me in what is normally called the learning zone, Amy is talking about. You are not forcing me to confront with things that I don't like and force me to think and so on. So once again, I don't think that technology is good or bad. I think that technology can be used in a positive or a negative way. So as far as we only use AI integrated into platforms in order to create services that are only for you and keep yourself in a bubble, probably we are not using that properly. And back to the point, it's a human responsibility. We truly believe in human responsibility in how things are done and how you use the technology.
I mean, and what you're describing there, the bubble is, also people talk about echo chambers, of course, and that we end up just hearing what just having our biases confirmed the whole time. But listen, the last time I spoke to you two, which wasn't very long ago, we talked about unconventional platforms. Not all platforms rely on algorithms to do the matchmaking. Tell me a little bit more about unconventional platforms. And I must confess, I have a special interest in this particular subject.
Well, unconventional platforms is the topic we are working on with our PhD student, that is Silvia Gadola, that is actually doing her entire research path on this topic. We started 2 years ago reasoning on this, not the label, but the idea, actually from the cases that Tommaso just mentioned. So the airport, train stations, and the shopping mall that was actually mentioned in the very early papers on two-sided markets. Our belief is that, as you said, as we were discussing before, these business models have always been around, but in a certain way, they were considered peculiar of certain industries. So shopping malls work like that. The fish market work in that way. Newspapers work like that. With platform thinking and with the digital evolution, we are now seeing that those exceptions can actually be a new normal, a new standard. And this is putting in place the space for reflection on many businesses that did have a peculiar business model, but are actually having all the core characteristics of platforms. They do have multiple set of customers needed to interact among them. And there are some kind of externalities. As Tommaso was mentioning, the numbers are lower, so they are different, but there are actually similar mechanism, living labs, co-working spaces. Can I say that? Can I say it, Des?
Yeah.
Thinkers50.
Yeah,
a community like Thinkers50. These are unconventional platforms. There are spaces, and they are unconventional, meaning that there is not directly the digital app that lets you find the perfect match. And on the others, they are unconventional because you don't have the tag written on your jacket when you are going around in a certain way. But in the same place, different people have different roles. And the idea of working on unconventional platforms is pushing us to help this type of organization in seeing themselves as platforms, not because we like to define platforms, and I must say we like it, but because there are opportunities hidden in a platform structure. And if you recognize yourself as a platform, you can open up opportunities for innovation.
Thinkers50 is very open to innovation and evolution and all those things. But we are, proudly still very much a human driven
Platform.
In as much as we call it curation rather than matchmaking, but to some extent it is the same. It is the same thing. What we're trying to do is to bring we've got a slogan, thinkers plus doers equals impact. What we're trying to do is bring the ideas to the people, into the heads and the hands of the people who can actually use them. In order, that's not, that's only the beginning. The point is to have an impact within organizations so that we end up with better led, better managed, better organized, more humane, all of those good things. So, but thank you for the shout out. I am interested to read this piece of research when it comes out. I could probably learn quite a lot from it. Anyway, that's enough about Thinkers50. Let's take some more questions from some of the people who are tuning in. I've got Jose from Costa Rica. In today's landscape, numerous platforms are available, but what would you say are the critical factors that make some more successful than others?
Oh, wow. It's a very complicated question, actually. So there is an easy answer, but it's not covering the whole thing, I think. So the easy answer is, on the large majority of cases, numbers. So one of the reasons we are very often asked why in Europe we do not have so many big platforms as we do have in the US or in China. And basically, there are many very different answers that could be connected to the regulamentations and so on. But the real big answer to this question is that it's a matter of numbers. So if you have got a system which is based on network externalities, the value that you perceive is connected to the number of people on the other side. So if you are targeting a big market and only 0.01% of the potential customers are reacting, if your market is very big, you easily reach the critical mass. That point beyond which people on the other side will see the value. But if you're targeting small markets, so if instead of targeting a market like in the US, so 380 million, I don't know how many, you're targeting Italy, 60 million, you need to have much more people reacting. So 0.01% is not enough because you don't get to the numbers. So the first answer to Jose Luis' question is basically it depends on numbers and how you start. So of course it's easier if you've got a bigger market, but this is only part of the answer, because I also think that things are changing rapidly, and now there are some more variables that start to be relevant in the equation. So for a certain amount of time, matching people was everything. But now we see that there are some initiatives that want to add something more to the equation. It is not just to matchmake, but to do something that makes sense. And we see that somehow people and customers and us, we are reacting more positively to some services that are more meaningful. Too Good To Go. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's a basic transactional platform. You got people on one side, you got stores on the other side, food stores on the other side. At the end of the day, the food store has got a certain amount of food that cannot be sold. And so they decide to pack it and to sell for a lower price. You must go there, you pick it up, you got a lot of food for less money. They still have got some money for food, otherwise it will be wasted. And even more important, it is not wasted. And the main reason why people do it is not really for not paying the food. Of course, somebody might do it for it, or for getting the few dollars instead of throwing away the food. It's because it makes sense. So, and I think that at the basis of platforms, there is a better usage of resources. What we say is that platforms are based typically on idle assets. So some assets that have got some value inside that is not completely used. So it's a better, more clever, more efficient way of doing business. And I think that this is becoming more and more relevant in terms of, not just in terms of what you do, but why you do it. So to go back to Jose Luis, probably it's a matter of numbers, but we also start seeing that what you're doing is particularly relevant, and the meaning, the purpose that you got is particularly relevant.
If I can follow up to what Tommaso was saying, I would add another factor that is actually connected with this idea of the idle asset. So platforms that are more successful tends to repeat the platform game more than once. You see, Uber created Uber Eats, for example, just to make a very simple example. But in this idea of playing the platform thinking game more than once, there is one very relevant element, which means recognizing that many of the management and business models that we are used to are not working, or better, should be slightly revised when dealing with platforms. One message that to me is super important is the idea of customer obsession. It's amazing when you develop a service that you are customer obsessed. But if you are developing a platform and you've got the customer obsession of only the end users, the guys getting the food into Good to Go, the guys traveling in Uber, or the travelers in Airbnb, well, you have an issue, because you are not properly designing a value proposition for the other customers, the restaurants for Too Good to Go, the host in Airbnb. You can be customer obsessed, but you need customers obsession. You need to be obsessed by various sides. And actually, this little detail that is actually understanding the essence of a platform is a critical factor to design multiple services, multiple value propositions that are coherent in an interactive ecosystem that's that platform. And this is actually, on the one hand, the secret success sauce of many platforms, and the reason why many wannabe platforms actually fail.
I think that's really, really interesting what you've just been talking about, because to some extent, as we're trying to make every business more sustainable, platforms seem to have a lot to offer. I mean, you just mentioned the word, Daniel, of ecosystem, and the fact that these things don't happen in isolation. It's not just the people who want the food. It's the rest. It is we, all of us, the users of planet Earth, have a stake in all of this stuff. And it seems to me from what you're saying that platforms could be one of the ways that we can begin to address that. The other point you were making about perhaps needing to revisit some of the management ideas and theories and how we think about things. You mentioned Porter earlier, Michael Porter, who we think a great deal of at Thinkers50. He has a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's great that he topped our ranking. One of his more, I think, more interesting recent ideas was the whole idea of shared value. How can we make sure that the value, the pie, as it were, that the value is shared in a sort of an even-handed way, or a way that makes sense? Because otherwise what you get is you do get I think there is a pushback against, obviously, Facebook and some of these organizations. Some of the big tech companies seem to want to take the whole lot, all the value. How do we address that, particularly as we move into the AI? I take your point from earlier too. We entered the AI era a long time ago. Some of us are just catching up and realizing what's been going on for a while. But how can we make it more equitable, I guess, is what I'm asking you.
And I think this is very difficult. because so the mechanism is incredibly efficient, which means that you are generating a lot of value. And typically what we say is that the platform provider is internalizing this value or part of this value. There are many people who are thinking about this. I'm thinking about people at Harvard, Mark Yancidi, had a piece about it. I'm thinking about a brilliant book which is called
Cloud Empires.
Cloud Empires. Sorry. So it seems. Sorry,
Cloud Empires.
Cloud Empires. It's a brilliant book about it. So the point is that we do not really have the mechanisms now. We have got a growing understanding of the problem. So the fact of start talking about value creation, value capturing, and value sharing, so adding the third part, that is value sharing, is already, I think, a great milestone. So we know that we've got something that we need to deal with. Unfortunately, the situation in this moment is not that clear. So it's not clear how to convince these companies that a part of what they are obtaining should be given back to society and community. In some cases, this is happening more. In some cases, this is happening less. We don't make names now, but we all know about them. And I think that start talking about it is the first step. The second will be when we will have enough alternatives in order to start making some kind of pressure as users towards these companies. So they are so efficient that they are very difficult to be attacked. But if we start, asking for a value sharing or part of the value, of course, there's nothing bad in capturing the value. It's absolutely okay. Also because they do an incredible work. So they are great in what they do, but we cannot really imagine that they capture all this value only for them. This is not okay. This is basically not okay. So I think that this is a discussion that we need to push forward and to put in front of people more and more.
If I can very briefly add to this, we recently had an event on LinkedIn that was titled Platform Renaissance. And one of the messages that we started from is very coherent with what you said. This platforms are a structure that were created looking for efficiency to reduce frictions. And when we talk about sustainability, reducing waste, reducing the friction is actually a central idea. We are living as a society, as a planet, grand challenges that fortunately so far we haven't lived, and now we are living them. We do believe that platforms, even though the name platform is sometimes misunderstood due to certain usage of that business model, can be part of the solution. And platform thinking or platforms are tools. Tommaso said it before, it's not good or bad. The point is how you want to use it. But framing some problems through platform thinking can be part of the solution in our opinion. Finding ways to share or to get an easier access to idle resources. Finding ways to actually answer to some of those challenges through the technologies that lies behind these mechanisms. We do believe there are a lot of opportunities there. If we leave aside specific usages of this model and we look at the model itself.
And we have run out of time, and I really was interesting to move into the whole sustainability conversation and to hear your points of view on that. I wish we'd had more time to explore that. Now, for those people who are tuning in, Daniel and Tommaso invented or created the platform thinking business model canvas, which I was looking at just before we came on and thinking we really need to use that at Thinkers50. I do recommend it. Where else can people go to find out more about your work?
Well, it's simple. We are very active on LinkedIn, and we do have a website that is platformthinking.eu that is getting all the resources we had. There is a lot of free material there, and everything that is happening is actually being posted there.
Okay, fantastic. Well, as I say, we're out of time. Please do join us again on the 20th of March at the same time, when our guest will be Hamilton Mann, Group Vice President for Digital Marketing and Digital Transformation at Thales. Daniel and Tommaso, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your company.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. It was great.